"Wow, I wish the tower ranges in Bloons were smaller," said no one ever, at least until I started this challenge. A key strategy of this game is lumping so many monkeys together that they begin to suffocate and the balloon track becomes a solid hail of impenetrable projectiles. Tons of towers are specifically based on upgrading others within the radius. So what happens when monkeypox sweeps through and our favorite latex-hating primates are forced into another bout of social distancing? Is it possible to beat chimps without overlapping tower ranges? What clearly cannot happen under any circumstances is that the gray circles emanating from my monkey towers touch each other at all. A single pixel of overlap equals failure. Sadly, things aren't quite that simple. A few towers have ranges completely disconnected from these circles, which would basically allow me to pack the map with impunity. So rule number 2, any monkey that has infinite range by default is banned, unless they're alone, which would be a terrible idea, so yeah, they're banned. And rule number 3, we're playing Chimps, the hardest mode in the game. That means no continues, hearts lost, income, monkey knowledge, powers, or selling. Basically every single way you could possibly buff yourself. No selling is especially brutal, because I don't even have the option of repositioning a tower after I set it down to adjust the range it's covering. The best I can do is quit out to reset things before playing the next round, which is absolutely allowed because there isn't even a way to see other ranges while placing a new monkey. So I have to have a perfect setup that works all the way through, no exceptions. Of course, the true difficulty determinant is not the mode, it's the map. This is definitely not possible on every map, and as I write this, I don't know if it's possible at all, but the key is always to keep things interesting regardless. Swatting a bunch of easy levels would be boring, so my goal is to beat one beginner, one intermediate, and one advanced map so I can hone my skills before taking on a final expert map. But of course, if you're annoyed that I'm not literally murdering my mental health for your amusement, make sure to dislike, unsubscribe, and go watch a lamer version like 2D's where he's on normal mode and the towers simply can't be in each other's ranges.
Boomerang monkey's fun. Boomerang monkey go brrrr.
Let's get started with relative sanity. I never had much doubt this would be possible on a beginner map since they're just so forgiving. Not quite to the point of letting me win first try though. At first I placed a buccaneer in the spa pit next to the Bloons starting cave, hoping it would be out of the way and allow for other defenses. Then I added a glue gunner down below to slow things up before the camo Bloons arrived. For my main monkey, the buccaneer, the ability to see those sneaky stooges succeeds a range increase, which would make this single tower take up half the map and lock away its most powerful form. I needed another method, so I plonked down a submarine in the opposite side pool and gave it radar to reveal the raiders. Lastly, I added a boomerang to the bottom right for a little extra bang. For a while, this worked. Everything slotted together nicely without overlap, and I just kept upgrading all of my characters as I bagged the cash to do so. I had an ill-fated brush with a mermaid before backtracking and continuing as I had been. I proceeded swimmingly, easily knocking out each successive round until I reached the 90s, when dark dirigible titans began to look dangerous. The reason I've been able to make it so far is due to my not-so-secret weapon, the aircraft carrier, which launches planes which can fly around the map and abolish Bloons from anywhere. And now you're probably thinking, but Dren, didn't you say that towers with infinite range are banned? No, I said towers with infinite range by default are banned. For this challenge, the distinction is frankly massive. Towers which start off with infinite range as soon as you place them down have a teeny tiny circle, which would allow me to cheese the challenge by placing a ton of them right next to each other while covering every corner. Conversely, while certain towers like the Buccaneer have upgrades which produce infinite range, their circle remains as large as ever, with the same deadliness to my challenge. This way, it's a massive trade-off, and I'll have to survive for a while to build up the cash necessary to reach that overpowered point. Even with my godlike gaming abilities, I think I'm gonna need that to beat some of the later levels. But do let me know in the comments if you want to see this challenge with all infinite range upgrades banned too. Still, it's not an instant win, as I so rudely found out upon nearing level 95. DDTs sped through the stage's swirls, and I couldn't damage them until they'd encountered my sub halfway through, so I restarted the round with a Hail Mary Ultra Juggernaut Dart Monkey to save me, which worked until level 99, where I was completely out of space and still lacked the required DPS, which forced me to give up and start again from scratch. This happened on my first 2 attempts and will be an increasingly relevant problem in the coming stages. Luckily, there's a primary mechanic I'd been neglecting during this early experiment implementation, heroes. Every hero automatically upgrades themselves with unique abilities at the end of every round, no cash required, and I knew just the one to solve my camouflage conundrum. Etienne's massive range and low damage output might not be the strongest way to approach this challenge initially, but at level 8 he grants every tower the ability to see camo balloons, the utility of which cannot be understated. I would need every ounce of firepower available to take down the DDT assault in rounds 90+, and as a bonus he'll eventually spawn a plane which can shoot anywhere on the map. As long as I get the currency to place him down early enough that he unlocks camo vision by round 24 with the first camo balloon, I'll probably be fine. However, his upgrades can work against me. At level 16 his range will increase again, quite significantly, and if any other towers are too close, that will result in an instant game over. This means I have to be extremely careful while placing him, and all the way up until he finally hits that upgrade in the late game. I learned this lesson after becoming overconfident on my third attempt, resulting in truly obscene overlaps with my glue gunner and super monkey. While failing yet again was not great for my morale, I played to completion in order to cement my strategy and finally won. Now I just had to do it for real. My buccaneer goes in the bottom left of the central pool, and as soon as enough monkey money was in my monkey paws at the end of round 8, I shoved Etienne as far into the upper right corner as I possibly could. The pirate's placement leaves just enough room for a glue gunner in the upper left, and things proceeded swimmingly with consistent upgrades until round 33, when the camo balloons really came out to play. My hero still has very little actual track coverage, but this is easily remedied by his drone summons ability, essentially tripling his damage output for a short while. I had to pay for level 8 in round 37 so my other towers could deal with the white camo balloons though. My pirate destroyer and acid gunner made quick work of the first Moab in round 40, and from here I was mostly chillin', especially once I bought the aircraft carrier. On round 60 I stuck a mermonkey in the bottom right pool because, get this, there's no one to stop me. My flagship and balloon solver dissolved anything that came my way, but once I reached round 90 I couldn't afford to take anything for granted and stuck a spike factory right by the exit to clean up any potential stragglers. Even though it hadn't been necessary by 95, I added another in the bottom left. This was useful in round 99, though I'm pretty sure my super monkey on the right ended up being more consequential. After obliterating the big airship of doom, I was so done with the absolute easiest part of this challenge. Yeah, I've still got a long way to go before I can hope to pull this off on an expert map, so let's move on to an intermediate stage, which is basically for beginners. What can I say? Where possible, I take the path of least resistance. Today, that path runs through the Sulphur Springs, a track that forces my plastic foes around each of these pillars' peripheries 1.5 times. I hoped that this would give me plenty of time to destroy them all, though the environment isn't as hospitable for my primates due to the, lava ravine. At least I now had some experience with designing solutions, so of course I immediately chose the worst place for my premier pirate. While the center may seem sensible upon first sight, it's actually terrible because my projectiles can't hit multiple balloons at once, plus it covers basically the entire circle, removing the possibility of putting literally anything else in a good location. So nope. The left side stream is much better to target tangentially, leaving a location at loop 1 for my glue gunner. Nice, this is coming along pretty well, so the next question is where to situate Etienne. Obviously we need him out of the way so his later range increases don't murder me, but optimally we'd still want some track coverage to take care of camouflage in the early game. Soon I settled on the lower right cliff side. This way he can target the middle and end of the track while still leaving the left side cliff open for an eventual spike spawner after round 51. Unfortunately, when I first tried this, I failed to notice the approximately 4 pixels of overlap with my aircraft carrier. It was only later on that I internalized the error of my ways, because otherwise this run would have been a success. Adding a sub to the upper right corner and a boomerang bro to cover the chasm closed things out. Along with upgrading my other powerhouses, I glued and bombed my way to round 100 with nary a misstep. Well, 99 hit me unexpectedly hard, but it was no match for the addition of Etienne's abilities. It was ultra silly to place an Ultravision Super Monkey instead of my boomeranger in the next true attempt, as that was always going to come back to bite me as soon as Etienne reached level 16. What followed that was the perfect run I'd been waiting for, welcoming my hero prior to round 12 and climbing the tree of upgrades I'd detailed previously. Here's my exact sequence of mid and late game purchases and actions if you're interested in trying this yourself, but we've got to focus on the actually hard levels now, so let's move on. As I began looking at the advanced levels, I first tried Ancient Portal, since it was the only one I'd already beaten, so I viewed it as the easiest by far. And normally that might be true, but the track's tight spiral and relatively small footprint made it immediately clear that this was not where I would see success. Also, there's no good place for my buccaneer, and I was not keen to give up on that overpowered strategy, so I had to look for another, which was not not ideal since I hadn't even unlocked chimps on any other advanced map. After browsing through them for a little while, I settled on Off the Coast as my most promising candidate. There's plenty of space for all types of monkeys and the track spans the entire screen. Despite these seemingly positive attributes, this would take me longer than the previous two maps combined and seriously concerned me about the viability of this challenge. At first, I couldn't even complete the introductory rounds. It seemed like no matter where I placed my pirate ship, one or two of the perilous unpopped would sprint past. Luckily, I have marginally more control over this process than just placing and upgrading my monkeys. Marginally. Most towers have an option to target either the first, last, strongest, or closest enemies, and by positioning my buccaneer in the middle of the first big bend, targeting the last enemy partway through, then switching back to the first for cleanup, clearing round 6 becomes semi-consistently manageable. And that's only the first obstacle. Luckily, mid-round target switching is no longer required. For now, we can use our newly acquired winnings to try a bunch of different investments, all terrible in unique ways. Eventually, the route became clear. I needed to place a submarine on the opposite side of the map ASAP. These would act as an excellent cleanup crew, popping any that slipped by my pirate, and could be enhanced later with long-range radar targeting. The auto-seeking darts it fires are also much more consequential here than they were back in Sulphur Springs, as they can continue further to hit targets outside the sub's immediate range. This is a relatively stable arrangement that lets me conquer a few more rounds and gather cash for upgrades. Etienne can chill out in the upper right corner as he waits to be, actually useful. As long as he can detect camo, round 33 is unlikely to be an issue, as the sub sees any enemies he can, despite not yet having direct detection. The next step is to add a sub in the very bottom left corner. Seriously, the closer to off-screen you can get, the better. Continually upgrading this setup got me pretty far, especially after the planes came online and I added a glue gunner up top. Unfortunately, this strategy was utterly skewered as soon as I reached round 90 and the DDTs came out. While each monkey might be relatively destructive on its own, they just don't have the firepower to stop one of these on such a short map, even when covered in acid and flames. The setup is viable, but it needs some significant adjustments to have any hopes against the final 10 rounds. The biggest change involves moving my first submarine closer to the beach, creating a cascading effect to open up the board. This would allow me the space to squeeze in another sub below the shipwreck. Etienne has to go higher up to avoid an eventual overlap, which killed quite a few very deep runs, but is ultimately positive as it lets him see more of the track at first glance. Also, there's barely enough space at the level opening to fit a mermonkey to the right of the track, getting in some great damage right out the gate. While very careful placement is obviously necessary to pull this off, I started to get a feel for it after multiple attempts. Properly arranging everything on the board is critical and helps determine which upgrade should go where. While it might seem like upgrading the far sub to missile mode is optimal because it covers more of the track, it also invalidates the inclusion of Etienne or another sub nearby with its extra range. As such, this job must go to the lower left, which unfortunately leaves little room for my mermonkey to actually cover the track. At least this becomes mostly irrelevant when dealing with Moab's large footprints in the late game. After setting up the main players, upgrades become rather obvious, though it's important not to buy any new towers until you also have enough money to max out their range. It's only possible to go home and reset the map on that round. Progress means there's no going back. Assuming I set everything up correctly, there's only one real decision remaining. What do I do with the last small bit of open space in the top left? Quite a few towers can squeeze into the core between my Buccaneer and Hero, but I think a Spike Factory is best. First of all, it will do identical damage as long as it has any track overlap, making an initial placement much safer, and it can build up a wall of spikes while my first towers hold back the initial wave. However, things are prone to come crashing down during the final rounds. Even with this relatively strong setup, I'm continually forced to use my UAV and submarine missile strikes to survive tough rounds. This is fine in the 80s when I'm still earning new upgrades and they don't take quite as long to recharge, but it guarantees a deadlock in the final rounds when I lack the firepower to take them down. This happened on round 90, then 95, then 99 as I continually improved my setup, but I still needed that bit of extra juice to beat back those DDTs and bring home victory. A few changes are necessary to make this happen. First of all, I absolutely need another missile strike submarine, but that means losing more space, which I seemingly don't have. To account for this, I shoved my first sub all the way to the right side of the screen where it only overlaps with a sliver of the track, and this leaves just enough room to adjust my third sub's placement, allowing upgrade path 2 while maintaining the rest of my strategy. Second, a Spike Factory actually isn't the play. Having a 4-2-0 glue gunner to stick some acid on the strongest balloons balloons is much more important, and by combining that with all 3 of my special abilities, I was finally able to best round 99. I did absolutely have to have 1 missile strike left over to finish off round 100's low health bad, though on my successful attempt I had 2, so this wasn't really an issue. Both are definitely necessary to make it through the previous 10 rounds though. The difficulty of completing only an advanced map in this challenge left me with some serious concerns about whether I'd be able to close things out on an even harder stage, especially since before this challenge I'd never even beaten an expert level on Chimps mode, period, because I couldn't figure out how. But let's ignore that tiny little issue for now. There's a first time for everything, right? In order to continue, I'd first have to figure out what stage I'd be attempting so I could unlock Chimps for this challenge. 2 stood out as obvious options, Inferno and Dark Castle. Inferno has barely any room to place towers by default, meaning it hypothetically shouldn't be too hard to find an arrangement without overlaps. Still, plenty of these floating islands can squeeze multiple monkeys together, so the lack of space could easily become a critical issue. My other idea was Dark Castle, widely believed to be the easiest expert level map. While the actual balloon track is shorter than I'd like and doesn't cover much of the screen, I hoped that the starting 4-pronged fork might give me some additional options before handling the concentrated kill zone. I got to work pirating some other people's solutions to unlock Chimps, so I could begin my experiments properly. At first, it did not go so well. A submarine is not enough to handle all the balloons at the end, and Buccaneers go buck wild with problems. Their range is so large as to invalidate my previous popping methods by leaving no space for other water-based towers at the end of the track. The basic darts they begin with can't even get a good angle, and the track layout makes their multi-directional attacks utterly useless. It seemed like even solving the very first round 6 wouldn't be an option. That was, at least, until I began to harness the power of the Mermonkey. By partially clipping one inside the castle wall and forcing another into the opposite water corner, it becomes barely possible to cover the entire drawbridge and surpass the first few rounds. Then, by buying their Trident efficiency upgrade, they'll be able to throw a little faster to take on the extra speedy yellow balloons which appear in round 11. This leaves me with enough cash to purchase my main man Etienne, who hasn't let me down yet. I don't plan to let him start now. While we need him quickly to gain important upgrades, his starting damage output is downright pathetic, especially when he can only access a quarter of the attacking balloons. In my early tests, I managed to make it a little further to round 20 with a tack shooter at the lower lane intersection, but this strategy quickly falls apart when such a short range can't even reach the top track. Such a puny reach might seem like a positive in the context of this challenge, but it still has just as many limitations. After trying quite a few variations of this strategy and a bunch of other random towers, I knew I had to think outside the box, and I finally found the right tactic when I began placing my mermonkeys on dry land. Or one of them anyway. It requires some very particular positioning to get the right trident angles for maximum damage, but there is a small range that can work as both towers are below the final path. It was with this setup that I managed to finally start a legitimate attempt, though it was far from smooth sailing. On round 8, a green balloon has a bad habit of sneaking by both, though this can be mitigated through greater trident efficiency for my drawbridge fish. Soon I'd have to buy it for my other, and I gave both maximum swiftness in the next couple rounds, along with ice powers for my land dweller. I thought that freezing the strongest balloons would give me enough time to deal with them, but with a bunch of pinks on the horizon, that still wouldn't be enough. After a bunch of bad guesses and retrying the same failing Etienne strategy over and over, I tagged in a wizard monkey to stop the balloons with his fireballs. This worked for a few more rounds, but quickly fell apart after I set down a sub and accidentally caused an irreversible overlap with a long-range upgrade. There is not as much room as I'd like here. Still, I'd managed to solve the opening salvo, which would be critical to finding a real solution sooner, or more likely, much later. I restarted my quest with a few mermonkey variations before settling once again on the version which had worked previously. This time, I assigned immediate efficiency upgrades to the grounded merman, though they must be applied to both before moving ahead to sharper, icier projectiles. Speed is everything here, though I did lend the land monkey a bit of a sharpness boost before implementing Etienne in the upper left corner during round 13. As I learned later, getting him this soon is utterly critical in order to begin his upgrade cycle and deal a little extra damage. Still, I remained no match for round 15's pink balloons, even with an icy upgrade. I found that the key was rapidly switching my mermonkey's balloon target in order to throw at multiple angles and hopefully get lucky. I really don't think there's any way to get this down to an exact science, but it is technically possible. Switching targets also somehow managed to get me through round 16, 17, and 18, and at that point I was just completely relieved that I hadn't hit an impossible dead end with this challenge. The further I went, the more it seemed like there would be something left to discover. Once again, giving Water Monkey ice powers and swapping targets redeemed me through round round 20, and I was left tantalizingly close to purchasing a spike factory. While I don't start the round with enough cash, I can pop 17 Bloons and buy one in media race, dropping a few sharp piles from the castle ramparts just in time to handle some stragglers. This was by far the strongest strategy I'd found yet on this map, and its power was such that it allowed me to coast through round 28 before lead Bloons forced me to become a Riptide champion. Once again, this trivialized things until round 32, when I had to create an Abyss Dweller to handle the drawbridge's final surge. But at this point, I was chilling. Every new substantial upgrade was enough to handle a few rounds, and I was raking in cash. My spike factory saw a few spikes in its power level before round 40's Moab proved simply too much to take down. Or so it seemed, but $6,000 thought differently. By turning my Monktopus into an Abyssal Warrior and committing just a bit of environmental damage so Etienne can see further, I didn't even need his Drone Swarm ability to clean up this big blue blimp. Even better, this setup is surely sufficient through round 49 when failure finally caught me off guard. Luckily, an upgrade to my lovely spike factory helped me handle things with plenty left in the bank. Now I bought myself 2 subs, one for missiles in the bottom corner to bypass the castle walls, and a second up top for traditional dart guns. They'd been great in the past, and hey, the more the merrier, as long as everything still fits, of course. I soon splurged on a first strike to handle round 60, but it turned out to be unnecessary. With 3 powers in my bank and such a phenomenal setup, I felt primed to win right then and there, but sadly this wouldn't come to pass. Not because of the spiked mines I needed on round 63 or round 71's Arctic Knighting, but because of my recurring foe, Etienne's level 16 upgrade. As his range expanded into the space where my dreams go to die, it became clear that my real puzzle inhabited the end game. Still, I figured I'd keep playing to see the strategy through and learn the lay of the land for a future successful attempt. My preemptive strikes protected the run on round 80 and made short work of later Moabs, though 85 pressured me to use Etienne's special airstrike powers, which hadn't been necessary up until now. 86 fell quickly in its relative simplicity, but 87 is a much more difficult version, which forced me to activate all of my rechargeable abilities. Luckily, these were enough to power through, though 88 wasn't any kinder, and I once again had to use my first strike advantage. At this point, I'd built up a sizable stack of cash, but using just a bit for my 420 glue gunner and leaning heavily on Etienne's aerial abilities took me to round 91, where I finally had to take my Mermonkey to its maximum. Aerial missiles mashed me through to round 95, though I switched it up with a proper strike for 96. Unfortunately, this put my recharge timer on the back foot, so I added another sub in the back corner, even though that totally overlaps with my first one. Hey, I was desperate for some hope here, and while this was barely enough for 97, much to my chagrin, this failed run wouldn't even see completion as a proof of concept. Despite my 18,000 in the bank, everything died on round 98. I was entirely too cash poor for useful upgrades and lacked the space to place new towers. And this is where my 7 hours of purgatory truly began. No matter what I tried from that point on, I simply could not find any way to beat round 98. I opened up sandbox mode again and again to play with the infinite cash and check that everything could fit without overlaps, but at least a few hundred hearts were always drained away and I couldn't afford to lose even one. I tried tower variations and extra powers like the ninja's sabotage slowdown, but nothing worked. I had to keep the same basic layout that I knew could get me through the beginning since I could never move or remove them. Out of desperation, I even played 2 more full attempts from the beginning, hoping that my original loss had been due only to overzealous power use. At first, even round 81 eluded me, but upon restart, 98 once again found a way to be my nemesis. However, it would be remiss of me to imply that I had no progress during this time. Upon repeated experimentation, I discovered one of the 2 critical upgrades to my setup which might take me to triple digits. If the original Mermonkeys were placed far enough apart, there could be just barely enough room for a spike factory on the final road. Even better, by targeting the middle path upgrade to take down Moabs, the resulting Bloons would be even more vulnerable to my spiked mines at the end. Plus, I could purchase a brand new power to cover the entire track in hot spikes, perfect for the endgame wave rounds. I played with this setup to round 98, setting a bonus ninja on the bottom ramparts and sticking to a single all-powerful sub, but unfortunately this still was not enough. Even with nearly 30k in my pocket, I retried this round for over an hour to no avail. Sure, some attempts were closer than others, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. I'm playing Bloons. Then, get this, I did the exact same thing all over again. I restarted and I used a very similar strategy to make it all the way to round 98, and then I got stuck again. Shocker, I know. It seemed that no matter what I did, the final victory of this challenge was doomed to failure. I wasn't aware aware as I entered, but my last round of testing would take only 10 minutes. By moving my landfish between the opening track prongs and upgrading him into a Poseidon, round 98 would stand no chance against my all-powerful water god. Though I was able to quickly confirm this, it wouldn't be smooth sailing. First of all, this is yet another late-game range increase that I'd need to account for from the very beginning, and it was prone to intersecting Etienne's massive late-game circumference. This is solvable by placing Etienne as far north as possible and praying that the pixels stay far enough apart, but there would be no way to be sure until past round 70. While an altered mid-game strategy to set this up might be enough to get me the win, a $50,000 upgrade is steep. In the past, my setup hadn't been strong enough to let me build up that much extra, but I'd have to find some way to make sacrifices where I could. Armed with the requisite knowledge, I once again waded into the fray. My first real attempt at this was remarkably successful. I didn't beat the challenge, of course, but I did prove it was possible by beating chimps on an expert map for the very first time. Everything fit together perfectly. Near pixel level precision was necessary to set everything up. However, I miscalculated my initial mermonkey placement, and by the time I could afford Poseidon on round 82, I was presented with the barest bit of overlap from my Moab spike factory. Truly heart-wrenching, but by this point, I was already basking in the warm glow of success. I knew it couldn't be too far away now that I'd found the solution. While I was more careful with my spikes and submarine on the next attempt, I saw an even thinner sliver of dark gray overlap with Etienne after round 81. Perhaps it was a mistake to believe an expert map could ever be cooperative. Two more failures followed this, both caused by out-of-order purchases which made me too weak to continue. But with every single one of those many lessons behind me, I knew I had what it takes to beat this challenge once and for all, proving myself the greatest Bloons player to ever walk the earth. This game started like any other, 2 mermonkeys down and trident efficiency to pass round 7, 8, and 9. 10 is just a bit too much for them, so I stacked on a swiftness boost for the blue Bloons and another to handle 11's yellows. This left me with enough cash to purchase my not-so-secret weapon Etienne before the end of round 13 to start claiming those sweet upgrades. Icy tridents for my water tower slow down the drawbridge stragglers in rounds 15 through 18, boosting my budget enough to stick my spike factory on the castle ramparts as a last line of defense. Its power to build up a sharp wall while mermonkeys are handling the rest is truly invaluable and easily carried me to round 22, after which icing up my other mermonkey was required to continue. When round 26 once again became a bit too much, I slotted in my second spiker while leaving as much spare room as I could manage, and 28 necessitates a Riptide champion to rip apart the lead-coated Bloons. By this point, I had an extremely solid setup, entirely annihilating the camo round even though my mermonkeys had yet to gain the gift of extended sight. While I did fail once on round 38, upgrading my early track spike factory got me through, and prioritizing the other was plenty for 39. 40 was a little tougher with my comparatively low cash levels, but luckily my Abyssal Dweller's new tentacles can't increase its range, keeping me safe from spiky overlap. A factory upgrade for bigger and better balls saved round 43, and from this point on I was virtually untouchable. I breezed through to 52 with nearly 20,000 in the bank when I purchased my final necessary tower, the submarine. After upgrading it and ensuring that I wouldn't be left with any sneaky tangential overlap, an Arctic Knight was on the table to handle round 54. With my eye on the Poseidon prize, I now just had to save up 51k to secure my victory. This is easier said than done, of course. I added spiked mines to my lineup on round 57, wiping out 2/3 of my cash reserves, but from there I was off to the races. This can solo a few low-level Moabs, letting me climb the ladder to round 63 where I was forced to invest in an Abyssal Warrior. I still had time, and I knew these upgrades would be necessary, but they still made me somewhat antsy. I knew from experience that one wrong move could tank my entire attempt. However, I needed nothing new until round 76, where the swarm of low-level Bloons skated past my high-damage defenses. While Spike Storm would have been perfect here, purchasing now creates a cooldown timer that takes too long, forcing me to use my UAV instead. With this, I continued to construct my mountain of cash, reaching 30,000 by round 77 and 40 by the end of 79. A drone swarm was all the extra firepower I needed to handle round 80 Zomji, and while 81 would overwhelm my defenses when faced with inaction, the drone swarm once again proves itself enough after its recharge. Now I was just one round away from affording my ocean deity, and the spike storm would be plenty to get through. To my great relief, my initial conservatism when placing towers had finally paid off, leaving undeniable gaps between my new range, the spike factory, and a fully upgraded Etienne. Now I would be truly unpoppable, or unstoppable. Poseidon's placement was perfect for targeting the final stretch of track, dumping waves of trident damage into any Bloons unlucky enough to cross his path. At this point, the game just played itself. On round 88, I bought my first strike capability as a last resort to make sure it would be fully charged when I needed it most. Still, I had no immediate use for it, and round 90's maxed out Etienne Galleon added yet another damage source as my circling airplane gained infinite auto-targeting missiles. Round 93 fell quickly before my wrath, but I wasn't out of the woods just yet. 94 goes a bit too crazy to be handled by my defaults, but that's what my array of extra abilities is for. Etienne's aerial powers mixed with a spike storm was plenty to take him down. Round 95 has a similar problem as the wave of some 60 DDTs were primed to break through my spike walls, so I finally utilized the chaos of Poseidon's power to wipe them from the map. This provided the cash to purchase preemptive strikes on all Moabs, tearing through round 96, though 97's double fortified zombies inspired a missile strike to delete one and focus all fire on the others. Now I was once again face to face with my nemesis, round 98. As the wealth of high-level balloons advanced through my fortifications, Poseidon's rogue wave swept through to freeze them in their tracks, utterly annihilating the entire army. I had won, and the final 2 rounds were simply formalities. 99 required no additional attention, and a submarine strike can wipe round 100's bad from the face of the earth before it can spawn any more minions. So yes, it is possible to beat chimps in Bloons Tower Defense 6 without ever allowing tower ranges to overlap, and I triple-checked everything after the fact to confirm my victory. All in all, this challenge took me about 30 hours, and that's not even counting some extra runs I did to unlock this maximally hard mode on new maps or some various upgrade paths to test. This journey has been truly absurd, and I had no idea when I started whether I'd be able to find a way through, but perseverance and problem solving wins yet again. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see another Bloons challenge, or if I should continue this one with different maps or modifications. As always, a special thanks to my Alheimer channel members Mactax, Jzinxao, Gina Ragnos, Blue Blur, Fertilinio, Titan X21, Nathan, Turfy Apple 2, Fernando M. Varela, Daniel Vino, General Rise 8708, Jonas Larson, Darth Vader 31, and The Nailed Bread.